For many of us, Japan is associated with the homeland of samurai, a land of cherry blossoms and very picturesque nature. It is indeed an exotic country, with a long and often complicated history, interwoven with numerous internal wars. While planning a trip to Japan, I watched a lot of interesting documentaries, also about its history, but I do not think that I became an expert in this field, so I will skip this aspect with silence. However, I would like to share some personal observations that, together with my wife, Agnes, we made during our first, short trip to Japan. I say first because I hope for another. My comments may be a little varied and not necessarily arranged in chronological order, but I will try to reflect the atmosphere of this extraordinary country. The first thing that catches the eye is the ubiquitous, extraordinary cleanliness and order. There is a saying that something works like a Swiss watch. I have been to Switzerland many times and I am ready to say that the Japanese watch is even more adjusted. Already on the first day of our stay in Tokyo, we noticed that there are no trash bins on the streets, but at the same time, there is no trash on the streets. How is that possible? The solution to the puzzle is simple: the Japanese don't litter. When they have something to throw away, they take the garbage with them and throw it into special containers at supermarkets, where they are immediately sorted for waste and recyclable materials. If somewhere, and this was extremely rare, we saw some abandoned garbage, then it was certainly not left by the Japanese. It is unthinkable for the Japanese to smoke on the street. Such behavior is in a very bad tone and indicates a lack of respect for others. Smoking is acceptable in designated places, where everyone throws a cigarette butt into a spacious ashtray, not as seen in many countries on the pavement or lawn. Similarly, with food and drink on the street. I mean, street food is extremely popular and of great quality, but no one eats or drinks when walking on the street. Of course, I saw several pedestrians eating, but they were usually tourists because a native Japanese does not do that. It is customary to eat food purchased on the street while sitting on benches or other quiet places, but it is not appropriate to walk with it. Food in Japan is phenomenal. Very healthy and tasty. It is largely based on seafood. You can eat everything without fear because the Japanese are really a clean nation, and the dishes are fresh and very well served. The city is full of small restaurants that can often only accommodate 3 to 10 people. There are so many of them because of their lifestyle, very long working hours. Most Japanese do not cook at home every day. Everyone eats out. It's funny, and it's good to get used to it at first, that all business in Japan is not focused on the ground floor of the commercial buildings. On the contrary, a building with 10 or 20 floors may have a different business on each floor, and often when looking for a restaurant you should also look up and look not only at what is at street level. The Japanese are a nation that loves innovation and shopping. They love shopping centers, where of course there are numerous restaurants with definitely healthy and really good food. What impressed me was the fantastic idea for ordering food. Well, every small restaurant has a machine for taking orders. It has several large buttons, each with a photo of the dish, name, number and price. It is enough to deposit the amount being the price of the ordered dish before ordering and press the button. After accepting the payment, the machine prints the receipt and gives the change. Then we give the receipt to smiling and bowing saleswoman, who hands us a small buzzer with our order number. It gives us a moment to choose a table and in a few minutes, a gentle vibration informs us that our meal is ready. A simple and quick solution that really makes ordering food especially easy for tourists. Food ordering machines are just one of the many solutions we've been delighted with. Machines from which you can get drinks, electronics, fresh underwear, fruit, snacks, they are on virtually every corner. They are always functional and full of attractive goods. Going back to cleanliness, which always shows, in my opinion, the level of culture of the inhabitants of a given country, I must definitely write about toilets, especially about public ones. I have never seen anything like this anywhere. Just as the Japanese are able to take care of cleanliness is something beyond all standards. Public toilets are very common, especially at all parking lots, on highways, tourist facilities or in shopping centers. They are always fantastically clean and fragrant with sterility. I have repeatedly seen the whole crew of cleaners who are doing cleaning with huge attention. What really surprised me was the fact that public toilets are in excellent technical condition and everything works in them. In addition, the Japanese have long ago invented what is called washlet in North America. It is a special toilet seat that is heated and has an automatic water switch for washing the chassis and also drying it. This extremely hygienic solution eliminates the need for paper, which, as you probably know from your own experience, does not always guarantee an effective result. In Japanese toilets, we also often saw special toilets for children. A tiny toilet, urinal and wash basin, all adapted to the ergonomics of children, and this part of the toilet, separated from the part for adults, is painted with children's pictures. In the end I will mention handicap washrooms, spacious, equipped with all devices necessary for the comfort of the disabled. From special toilets, urinals, wash basins, emergency call systems, automatic doors, everything is clean and aesthetic. It's just a different, much higher level of care for people with mobility problems, which we loved. The Japanese have a special respect for work and for superiors. I do not know if the source of this respect dates back to feudal times, but no one criticizes the superior's orders here. Work is usually taken on the assumption that it will continue until retirement. This is due to the mentality of the Japanese convinced that work is forever. Every employee is absolutely loyal to the company and slowly climbs the ladder of positions. One of the first things new employees are taught is how to greet colleagues and superiors. Because there is no habit of shaking hands in Japan, they are greeted with a bow. Interestingly, there are several types of bows there. If we welcome friends, we bow down about 15 degrees from the vertical, holding our hands on the seams of pants, and it is permissible to look in the eyes of a colleague. When we greet the immediate superior, the bow must be deeper but without looking into the eyes. When we welcome the boss, the bow is practically 90 degrees from the vertical and you must absolutely not look in the eye. In this position we must last at least 15 seconds. One evening I watched two groups of businessmen, about 10 people each, who met on the promenade in the evening. When they faced each other and began to exchange bows, it lasted about 5 minutes. It sounds funny from the perspective of our culture, but in Japan, no one disputes it, because the habits rooted in the Japanese are widely respected. Each of us probably heard about the fact that in Japan you usually do not leave the workplace before the boss. And that's the truth. A typical day at work can be up to 14 hours because the bosses are not in a hurry to go home. Usually, senior managerial staff working in offices and corporations commute to work from distant parts of Japan. Travel time from home to work is often 2 or 3 hours each way. That is why most directors do not go home every day but stay in modular hotels. They go home on Fridays to spend a weekend with family. However, during the week, when they can finally leave work, because the boss has already left the office, they leave it in groups and spend time together. They usually go to dinner, karaoke or chasing girls together. Everyone is dressed the same way, black suits, white shirts, black ties, and must have a businessman's bag in hand. And the concept of chasing the girls has a completely different meaning than we think. Groups of bureaucrats usually spend time in the company of 1 or 2 ladies who perform a similar role as the geisha in the past. They are absolutely not ladies for bodily pleasures. The role of these women is to entertain men with conversation, that's all. Probably some people find it hard to believe, but that's the custom. It may also seem unbelievable to you, but 45% of the population in Japan, according to many surveys and statistics, do not have sex until the age of 35. This is a huge problem because society is aging and Japan has had a negative birth rate for years. The percentage of residents over 60 years of age reaches 30%, and because the average lifespan is extremely long, thanks to a healthy diet and good health care, it is increasingly said that the pension system in this country may be bankrupt. We have several reasons why there are few large families in Japan. The most important is the change in the traditional family model. Once, the master of the house worked and provided for his family, and the woman stayed at home and raised children. Today, many young, ambitious, well-educated Japanese women do not accept the traditional family model. They want to achieve professional success and give up marriage and raising children. In addition, young men are also afraid of responsibility for the family. Working long hours, they are so tired, and they do not necessarily feel like everyday family responsibilities. I mentioned geisha before. There is a common misconception that it is the equivalent of a prostitute. Nothing more wrong. Geisha is the highest quality artist to accompany men, those with class and money. The rates for a company are very high. Poor people do not even have a chance to spend time in such an exquisite company. To become a geisha, you need to undergo many years of training, which lasts as long as obtaining a medical diploma. Geisha are educated in special homes under the guidance of an experienced teacher, usually a retired geisha. Usually, after 3 or 4 years of training, a young girl receives a lower degree of initiation known as Miko. In the next few years, she is usually in the service of a real geisha until she is elevated to the rank of a geisha in a special ceremony. During these many years, the girls undergo training, learn to play instruments, conduct conversations, tea brewing, and dance. Each of their movements is studied and each sentence is spoken with care and great sensitivity to make the men who pay for the service feel special. Of course, geishas lead lonely lives and this is actually a huge sacrifice. The association of a geisha with a prostitute took place after the Americans conquered Japan after the Second World War, and many working girls introduced themselves as geishas to provide completely different services, not involving singing or playing an instrument. The Japanese are masters in many areas, and the level of their transportation impressed me greatly. When we were walking the main streets of Tokyo on the first day, I was actually a bit surprised that they are not as crowded as I expected. There was a crowd, but in general, it was possible to pass other pedestrians. Especially that the Japanese follow the way they move around the city. They walk on the left side of the pavement, in the middle of which is a convex strip runs, allowing you to easily feel when we enter the other, wrong side. When we decided to use the metro and entered the underground, it turned out that under most of the main streets there are gigantic, underground passages, on which much more people move than on the surface. The reason is simple: convenience. No atmospheric influences, no need to wait at traffic lights, shopping is excellent and easy to get to the next metro stations. When we entered the metro station, we were shocked at first. 5 or 6 subway lines in different directions. Traffic like in a hive. How do you find a direction? Where to buy a ticket? A few nervous moments, thrill on the back, but calm came quickly. Each line has a different color and direction signs in the same color. Clear and very dense marking. Machines for buying tickets in the color of the appropriate line. It was enough to put the banknote in the machine and press the required price for the journey, and the ticket and the change fell out immediately. Trains run at a high frequency, and waiting for the next one does not take more than a few minutes. While driving we were receiving non-stop information in Japanese and English, and many signs displaying the names of the current station and the next one. Extraordinary punctuality. No one in the subway talks. The telephones are silenced and even when they ring, no one answers them. Yes, people read emails and texts, but it would be a shame to disturb other travelers. The Japanese metro is so extensive, in every city we've been to, that practically no car is needed. Not only that, all of Japan is connected by a network of high-speed trains reaching speeds of over 300 km per hour. They are so punctual that the sum of all trains delayed in Japan does not exceed 38 seconds per year. It's amazing, because Japan created all these communication solutions in a very mountainous country. 75% are mountains, despite colossal damage during World War II. They started practically from scratch. I will also mention the highways. This is another phenomenon. We admired the excellent and very spectacular solutions, especially in large cities. Multi-level flyovers, at the same time ease of movement. And beware, the surface lasts for many years. Apparently no one adds sand to the asphalt to ensure a new repair contract every year. Japanese have been brought up to work in a group since childhood. This can be seen at every step. Very often we saw school trips of different ages that visited the same monuments as we did, learning about the culture of their country. There was an incredible order in the group. Nobody screamed, threw trash, did not run without any sense. On the contrary, full discipline. This way of raising children translates into the Japanese's whole life. The individual should always submit to the group. People there also have incredible respect for work. They consider work as a blessing, no matter what it is. We watched the woman directing the movement on the path leading to the Imperial Palace. Every time someone came by bike, there the bow was first. Then welcome and wishes for a good day and a gesture of direction. She stood in one place and her work was exactly the same, monotonous, but the Japanese did it with the same commitment for many hours. In my opinion, the enormous pressure of the environment to comply with the group and social norms leads to many psychological problems. Japan statistically has the highest number of suicides in the world. Perhaps it is a remnant of the times of samurai, when the warrior, not fulfilling his tasks as expected by the master, disgraced himself, real or imaginary, and committed seppuku, that is, he took his life drastically. But in fact, the pressure to be the perfect link in a huge machine is enormous and often probably too insistent. That is why many Japanese people are escaping into the virtual world. The Japanese love computer games, but not at home because there is no room for them. Everywhere we meet huge arcades for games in which there are several hundred machines, together producing unbearable clatter. The Japanese also love comics that allow them to move into a fantasy world, less restrictive and harsh than reality. There is a huge number of comics and sex games in the market in which you can choose the perfect girl, with your dream shapes, intellect or even how she is addressed. Young boys with such a supergirl have imaginary sex and often take them on imaginary date. Another antidote to their stress are absurd television game shows. Some rely on humiliating the opponent in the game as much as possible and publicly, of course, to the satisfaction of viewers. This type of behavior, which is not a template in everyday life, is such a safety valve in this well-organized world. Crime is minimal in Japan. Out of 120 million inhabitants, only about 50,000 people are currently jailed, while the capacity of the prisons is up to 90,000. In the US, there are over 2.1 million people in prison with approximately 330 million inhabitants. Statistically speaking, 4% of the population of the Earth, USA, has 25% of prisoners in the global number of all prisoners in the world. In Japan, over the past 10 years, the increase in crime is caused by deliberate violations of the law by older people and single people, aged over 65, who want to get to jail guaranteeing them free food and roof over the head. It may sound funny at first, but it actually shows that a lonely old age is not fun at all. The Japanese diet contains a lot of seafood in various forms. From fish, crustaceans and mollusks to algae. The Japanese consume almost 60% of all fish caught in the world. They love fresh fish straight from the sea and indeed they are easily accessible. In many places, you can find fish markets, where you can not only go shopping but also eat something freshly prepared on site. When I looked at various strange sea creatures, I wondered if I would have the courage to try them. But after a moment's hesitation, I decided that sushi and sashimi are a better choice. And I must say that every time it was a feast. Everything fresh, delicious and very reasonably priced. In addition to fish, rice is one of the main ingredients of the Japanese diet. As much as 90% of the rice demand in Japan is of local origin. The remaining 10% is mainly imported from South Korea. The difference between the products is fundamental. Japanese rice is glutinous and is ideal for sushi or bento box. Korean rice is loose and is mainly used for feed production. Farmers' work in Japan is extremely difficult and it is slowly dying out. Young people moving to the cities looking for work in administration and large corporations. They find the work on the land too difficult and unattractive. Therefore, after the death of a farmer, his home often remains empty forever. The government is striving to ensure that these houses are inherited by legal heirs, the children of farmers. However, they refuse to accept such an inheritance, because it involves the necessity to pay an inheritance fee of almost 40% of the value of the house. Young people can't afford it, because they can't afford to buy flats in the city. This situation raises a big problem, and many homes are simply demolished to free the land for sowing rice. The Japanese pay close attention not only to what they eat but also how to eat. They are aesthetes and the food, even in the case of fast food, is served in a very elegant way. In Japanese restaurants, when a traditional meal is served, it will be served as a whole series of small portions of starters and delicacies, plus some main course. A distinctive feature of Japanese cuisine is diversity. Portions consist of many different ingredients. When we asked our guide whether they also eat breakfast in their own home served in this way, he replied with a smile, "Not anymore. Currently, omelette, toast and coffee dominate." Such a symptom of typical globalization. Japan is essentially a monocultural country. One people, one empire, one leader. How do we know that? Unfortunately, Japan in its long history also had dark times when it was Hitler's ally, sharing the same ideology of expansion and committing brutal massacres and mass rapes in China on a large scale. Today, no one returns to these infamous wartime times, but this multiculturalism has remained. On the one hand, it is the strength of this country, because thanks to it people think the same, act the same, take care of cleanliness and value teamwork. On the other hand, the lack of immigration leads to slow aging of the population and, according to many specialists, if Japan does not open to young immigrants, the country will be in great trouble. Opening up to immigration is, however, a beautiful theory because of the considerable barriers, bureaucratic and human, that make it difficult for foreigners to settle in the country. Although you can see foreigners on the streets, they are mainly tourists, who of course are always welcome, because they feed the state treasury with the money spent there. Despite what I described earlier, the Japanese are extremely accommodating, and even if they are unable to communicate in English, they are always willing to help. Young people write and read English quite well, but often have problems with conversation. But of course, there are exceptions, and I had the opportunity to meet Japanese with a perfect British accent. They are also, both women and men, extremely elegant and smartly dressed. Gentlemen, usually in black suits, but ladies, it's a real fashion review. There is really someone to look at. Another feature that suited me a lot was such a natural sense of class. A simple example, when we visited the sacred mountain of Fuji, we went to a special viewing platform from which you could take beautiful photos of the mountain. When the Japanese present there noticed that we were waiting in line to take a picture, with a polite gesture and with a smile they let us know that they would wait for us to do it. However, at this moment a Chinese trip fell on the deck, and this is where the cabaret began. Not only did they not bother to wait for their turn, but without any scruples they ran like a horde, practically pushed us out of the frame and began to take hundreds of photos. This circus lasted a good 15 minutes and none of them thought that others, for example us, also want to take pictures. Japan has an extremely interesting shape and location. The country consists of 4 main islands, stretched from north to south for a length of almost 2,500 kilometers. In addition, Japan has thousands of tiny islands, from north to south. Interesting climate diversity is associated with such stretching of the terrain. The northern island, Hokkaido, has a rather cold climate, while the southern island, Miyazaki, has a tropical climate. As much as 75% of Japan is mountainous, and the plains are either occupied by cities or by agriculture. Tokyo is located on the central island, Honshu, and covers less than 1% of the country's total area. However, it has as many as 34 million inhabitants, that's over a quarter of all Japanese. The contrasts between the urban and industrial landscape and the idyllic village are enormous. Despite this, even in large cities care for nature can be seen, and in the air despite the density, you do not feel smog at all. Numerous monuments from the past are very carefully preserved, and the extensive gardens surrounding them are eagerly visited. As we all know, Japan is a strongly seismic country, but numerous shocks do not surprise anyone here. Both roads, houses and railways are constructed in such a way that in the event of a strong earthquake the damage is as minimal as possible. A huge benefit of Japan's location is the numerous hot springs, often used as spas or in resorts with thermal pools. We had the opportunity to spend one day and night in such a place. It was an extremely interesting experiment because we not only had the opportunity to sleep in a traditional home on tatami mats spread on the floor, but we were also dressed in traditional Japanese kimonos. Of course, we took a bath in hot springs and savored the delicacies of traditional local cuisine. According to Japanese tradition, in the case of such baths, each sex has its own spacious space, in which there is a separate outdoor pool with water from hot springs, large hot tub, of course, cloakrooms and very comfortable bathrooms in which we had to wash the body before using thermal pools. Of course, everyone is in Adam and Eve's costumes. This way of caring for hygiene is firmly rooted in Japanese tradition. A few days after returning from Japan, I accidentally watched an interesting documentary about ancient times, the 15th century, and the period when the Portuguese tried to convert Japanese to Christianity. Very interesting was the mention of one of the missionaries who wrote that the Japanese were bathing every day when they were doing that only once every few weeks. Well, it seems that cleanliness is an innate quality of this nation. and probably the presence of numerous hot springs certainly had a huge impact on this fact. After all, warm water in large quantities encourages bathing. And a curiosity, do you know that in Japan, around Jigakudani, there is a large herd of macaques monkeys, who also willingly take long baths in warm springs? What an exceptionally clean country. Even monkeys like to bath. Leaving Japan, we were definitely looking forward to coming back. Travel here is comfortable, in clean conditions and very safe. Japan is an extremely attractive country for tourists, with an interesting history and culture. Although so different from ours, definitely worth getting to know. The described impressions are of course very personal, and as I mentioned, they are not intended to teach the history of this country. But I hope that they will bring you closer to the atmosphere of the street, Japanese lifestyle, culture and smells and flavors of the country of cherry blossoms.